Thank you all for coming. This is really a great turnout. I'm learning a lot, which is do more lunchtime events and do more events with the Jordan Center. So I am Jacob Remus. I am a professor at the Gallatin School, where I direct the Initiative for Critical Disaster Studies, which is very happy to be co-sponsoring this event with the Jordan Center. I will introduce our panelists, our speakers today in a moment, but I'm really excited to be here to talk about the ongoing war in Ukraine, and particularly photojournalism, covering it as journalists, how we think about it, how we, especially those of us who are far away, how we see it with possibly the foremost expert or the foremost person who has helped us to see it. So before we start, I just want to thank the Jordan Center, thank Dr. Maloletka, thank our two so far excellent student workers who are running this program, Professor Ann O'Donnell, who set us up with the Jordan Center, and at Gallatin, Teresa Anderson and Trisha Sabino, who are part of how you know that this happened. Like I said, I do disaster studies. I don't do advanced study of Russia at all, and so it's been a real pleasure it is a real pleasure to be in this space, and it's been a real pleasure to be working with the Jordan Center on that space. So today we're going to have a conversation between Lauren Walsh, who is a visiting assistant professor at the Gallatin School, a leading scholar of photojournalism, and particularly photography of crisis and crisis and conflict situations. She's the author of Through the Lens, The Pandemic and Black Lives Matter, the co-author of Shadow of Memory and Conversations on Conflict, and author of Conversations on Conflict Photography. She's also the co-editor of The Future of Text and Image, collected essays on literary and visual conjunctures, and the Millennium Villages Project, and the photo editor of Macondo, Memories of the Colombian Conflict. She has published in a wide variety of scholarly and also popular venues, and has been on a lot of had a lot of attention on popular media and the press. She most importantly, I think, for this case, Lauren leads media literary educational initiatives both in the U.S. and abroad, and has led workshops and lectured globally with an emphasis on ethics and photography, both again here and abroad, talking to photojournalists around the world. She heads media literacy education connected to a new global standard in digital image authenticity and verification, the Content Authenticity Initiative. And she's the director of Lost Rules America, a national archive of photography and memory, and runs Gallatin's photojournalism. She will be talking to Evgeniy Maloletka, a Ukrainian war photographer, journalist, and filmmaker who has been covering the war in Ukraine since 2014. He's also covered the Euromaidan revolution, protests in Belarus, the Nagorno-Karabakh war, and the COVID-19 pandemic in Ukraine. Maloletka was born on the Azov Sea in Bryansk, Ukraine. He graduated from the Kyiv Polytechnic Institute in 2010, and even before he graduated in 2009, he started working as a staff photographer for Ukrainian media, and has worked as a freelancer and collaborated with the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, Der Spiegel, and others. He is now on staff. He's now chief photographer for Ukraine for the AP. In February and March 2022, as you will hear, during the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Associated Press staff member Mislav Chernov and Maloletka, then a freelancer working for AP, stayed in Mariupol when it was encircled with Russian troops, under siege, and extensively bombed. Maloletka and Chernov were among the few journalists for international media in Mariupol during that period, and their photographs were extensively used by Western news media to cover the situation. Ordinarily, when giving this kind of introduction, I would tell you about some of Evgeny's awards, but if I did that, you would never get to actually hearing about them. Suffice to say that in this calendar year alone, he has won 19 awards for his photojournalism, and including 2 World Press Photo Awards and not 1, but 2 Pulitzer Prizes, which is actually why he is in New York right now to elect his Pulitzer Prizes tomorrow night. So with that, I will turn it over to Lauren and take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to just say a few words before I turn it over to Evgeniy, and a little bit in echo of Jacob's thanks, and thank you for the introduction, but thank you broadly to everyone who was involved in setting this up, and particularly the Jordan Center and the Initiative for Critical Disaster Studies. Okay, so I just wanted to say a few words before turning the floor over. And one of them is something that we are all aware of and has been coming up in my classes, which is that it feels weird to me to do a presentation on war photography and not acknowledge what is happening in the Middle East right now. Not to say that we need to go in that direction in our discussion or to politicize this at all, but I mention it for a few reasons, right? So one is we're talking about visual documentation of war, and there is a new war as of a week ago that we are paying attention to. Another is, and this is a point that Jacob made a reference to in giving the bio about Evgeniy, that he was in Mariupol, which was under siege, right, under Russian siege. And it was, you might talk about this, but it was Evgeniy and his colleagues who were the only journalists getting information out of an encircled city to the rest of the world. And part of what was going on there, in which we will see images of today, took place in hospitals, and particularly the strikes against a maternity ward. And this feels very resonant today with yesterday's news in Gaza. So I just wanted to sort of mention it by way of acknowledging it, but also to say that while the images we're looking at are incredibly distressing on their own, they might even have a heightened intensity in the wake of the current news. The third reason I wanted to mention it is that I was listening to NPR this morning. As we all know, Biden has landed in Israel. He's in Tel Aviv, or was this morning. And one of the things that he said, and I'm not quoting him to express any kind of affiliation, right? I said at the beginning, I want to keep this apolitical for the moment. But one of the things he said this morning was, the world is looking. And he didn't mean it in terms of visual journalists, but I am going to take it and bring it into that realm anyway, because the world is looking. And we are paying attention, and we are seeing, in part because of the visual documentation that is being created. And some of it, and for those of us on social media know this, some of it is being made by, quote unquote, citizen journalists. And we could come back to that in the Q&A if we want to think about the differences between professional and citizen journalists. But anything that you're seeing in established news media has been created by professional photojournalists. And that's where I kind of bring us back towards the role that Evgeniy has been playing in Mariupol, but in greater Ukraine since 2014, as you mentioned, then of course the uptick in 2022. So I think, I don't know, some of the questions that I was thinking about when I was putting together what I wanted to open with was to ask us, as we're listening to Evgeniy, to consider the role of the journalist, particularly in a conflict setting, both the dangers that the journalist is facing, but then also think about our role as consumers of these images, and to understand that these images do make a difference, right? The world is looking. They do influence policy and political leaders. They do influence our personal reactions to events, and to think about that as we listen to what he's saying. The NPR piece that I was listening to this morning, which of course was audio, my AirPods were in, I'm just kind of listening to it. And it was the first time I'd ever heard an audio-based reporter open with, some of what you're about to hear may be distressing. And I'm used to hearing that in a visual context, but it was a reminder to me, and it's even built into the presentation, but the images we are looking at are distressing, but they are also accurate reflections of war. And we can talk about what it means to look at that. So I think for those of you who are joining us online, we do have time for Q&A after. Please put your questions in the Q&A portion. Please put your questions in the Q&A portion of the webinar. Anyone in the room, we definitely welcome you to ask questions. Evgeniy will speak for about 25-ish minutes, and then we'll open it up to conversation. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say. I have to make sure I get my screen share going correctly. Let's see. How is it looking in the online space? All right, I'm going to turn it over to you. All right, without further ado.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here to say you hi and everyone who bring me here, make it this event possible. Thank you so much. I think it's today I want to mention a few things about the war crimes in Ukraine and how the information is used, and as well why information is important, and this importance of information, like how we are photographers trying to be in the field and what we are documenting on the ground. Because I'm a person who are usually trying to go deep and deep to be with the people and to tell the people stories and what is happening to my country. So visually with photographs, videos, and texts. Because for me, the war in Ukraine started not 24th of February, it started most from 2014 after annexion of Crimea, and it's completely turned the way of my photography and myself, my career, my family, and what I'm doing now. After so-called referendum, all of us came to the Donbass and saw how the things start, like Russia trying to influence on the regions in this southeastern part of Ukraine, including my region as well. And the events which is happening now, I always ask myself, is I will just remember that biographic images. So, I always ask myself, why it's happening, what the needs. And I found myself the answer that the Kremlin and the Russian authorities want to say. Like, it's my personal opinion, but it's because we can to prove you that you can't do anything to us. And that's what they are showing all the time. From 2014, Russia, after like annexion of Crimea, they decided to create a separated state, like a big one, so-called Novorossiya, included all the southeastern district, including like my Zaporizhia. Likely for Ukraine, they were not successful everywhere, but they were lucky to spread their influence on the two districts, Donetsk and Lugansk. So when they influence, bring the people from Russia, pay the people, the sportsmen, to come with Russian flags and say like, we want to be with Russia, we want to be like Crimea, and etc. And at the same time, that Putin saying like that we like, if the Ukrainians, like the Ukrainian authorities, if you will use the armed forces, we will stay behind children and women, not in front, but behind. And this phrase was highly like used by people, and they thought that if they will come to stop Ukrainian army, it will help. So, and we saw on the ground, like, while like Ukrainian armed forces coming to stop the armed groups, who caught the buildings. And it works, that the way how they did it, and we saw how the soldiers were crying. So it didn't stop that. The building was captured by the groups. They give the weapons. They started installing the checkpoints, and then the war started. And as well, like another war crimes, we saw like MH17 flight, Amsterdam, Kuala Lumpur was hit by Russian intercepted, so like them, and they killed mostly 300 people on board. And like later, how they were trying to use influence on the ground, they created many versions that this is Ukrainian jet hit or something else. That I will show you later what's happened to me. And the turning point, of course, after this war, when the Russian invasion. Actually, interesting part that this is the same date of on the 24th of February was the date of starting the land operation of the Desert Storm in 1991. Is it the same? They want to prove something? I don't know. But that's, I found interesting, we came in a group of three, name is Staslav Chernov, Vasilisa Stepanenko as a field producer, to Mariupol 1 hour before invasion and stay there for 20 days. We thought that the Mariupol will be the place to be in case something happens. Because on my expectation that Russia will, if they will invade, they will definitely invade from Crimea and from Donbass, but not from other districts. Like they will, I thought that will never happen. How they could go to Kiev and to Kharkiv and etc. So like I thought it's impossible. But the idea was that they will go south to create a land bridge to Crimea. So that's why Mariupol was the place to be. It was far away, and if they will close and surround the city with mostly 500,000 of residents will be trapped. The first deaths of the kids shocked us, and in the night, sometimes you couldn't like understand, and sometimes crying with the doctors. I remember like Alexander, anesthesiologist, when he saw us at the operating room and during resuscitation, they showed that to Putin. These eyes of this kid and the crying doctors. It was really hard to see the deaths of kids, and it's still like I'm looking on that pictures and thought it's me didn't took this. This is Evangelina. She was 3.5. One of because the Mariupol was like a big one, and the front line was nearby. Many residents who lived outside of Mariupol don't have cars, so they evacuate inside the city. And some of the centers host them, and one of them keep like around 2,000 people just in one shelter. And there was many of them all around the city. We slept like a couple of nights there, like to show is it, and to show and showing the kids like was full of kids, and the people don't know what to do, as well as like we're staying with them. And we saw that our people like were separated sometimes from one family separated from other group because their ideology and thinking what they will do next if the Russian will come. was completely different. Some of them were pro-Ukrainian, and some of them were pro-Russian. Some of them thinking what will be next for them. Another death is, this is Kirill. I remember his mom like screaming, like, why? Same question. Kirill didn't survive. He was only 18 months old. For 30 minutes, doctors tried to save him, but the shrapnel hit hard. Ilya was playing the football with his friends while the cluster ammunition hit the playground. Later, I spoke to two of his friends who were there, and they survived, and they were successfully treated in Germany. Father Sergei, and still he's a sailor. And to forget this, he went to do the work to forget. Sergei, and like all the hospital was full of patients, all the corridors, and we spent mostly a week sleeping with patients and doctors. And sometimes you thinking like that what the Russians are doing, they just burn the city randomly, but sometimes very precise. And then you understand that while they couldn't take the city, so they decided to burn it with the chaotic shelling, bombing, airstrikes, destroying infrastructure with all the civilians, spreading fear and panic. And then they turn on propaganda by the frequency F, sending that this is Ukrainian army shooting to you. There is only way to exit to Russia. There is no evacuation to Ukrainian side. And the people who are listening this are sitting in the shelters for a long period of time. Later, they will be leaving there. On the March 9, the Foreign Minister Lavrov, like announcing, later, I think, saying that the maternity hospital was hit by the Russian forces because it was occupied by Ukrainian army. We were nearby the maternity ward and heard the sound of a jet and multiple huge explosions. One of them hit the yard of the maternity ward. And when we arrived, we saw ladies, pregnant women, kids, families, doctors, medical personnel, but not the physicians, but not the military presence. Irina Kalinina was rescued carried on a stretcher by policemen and rescue workers. She had a big wound on her body. I think that's why that picture is very possible to use, because we came to the hospital later and witnessed that Irina and her baby, Miron, did not survive. She was only 32. I spoke to her husband, and he told me a story that for 2 days he was trying to find her. First day among the injured and other patients, and the next day among the dead. Went through the number of bags. Firstly, he said, I didn't recognize her, but later I recognized her. On the March 10, after publication, previous night of the images, many of the front pages published the images of Irina. But at the same time, we were like blamed, and me personally, that I did a stage photograph in the middle of the war, that every scene I'm a Ukrainian propagandist and informational terrorist. So the Russian propaganda media and Russian authorities are starting to do a campaign, like through the Twitter, official statements, all around their sources doing this, the special paper in many countries. And Mariana Vishemirska, a lady on a picture, a beauty blogger, later become a Russian propagandist. This is life. We came to the hospital where we were before and photographing these kids who did not survive. And we were trapped. The Russian forces took the building in front of the hospital, and the Russian tanks roll on the street. As a Z sign, it's first I saw it in the news, but now I see it by my own eyes. It's like the Z sign of war, is shooting to the buildings while we are filming from the 5th floor of the hospital. I think we were like lucky to survive at that time and lucky to escape. Ukrainian, we spent the night in the hospital, and in the morning Ukrainian special service came and rescued us, and we ran around 3 blocks under the heavy shelling to the cars, and they move us to the city center. Later, we found that after this shot, on the Metropolitska street, this tank killed 2 ladies. Another war crime. Because the Mariupol have a lot of dead bodies on the streets, in hospital morgues. Authorities dig a 30-meter long trench, and cemetery workers start to bring in the bodies, as well as volunteers. Kirill, Ilya, Evangelina are buried here. We were stayed there in Mariupol for 20 days and were lucky to escape through the 15 Russian checkpoints, pretending to be civilians. But the Mariupol was standing for 86 and was heavily bombed. I remember the days after, from the March 9 till March 15, while we were there, the bombing was every 20 minutes. Like the huge bomb, like for half kilogram, 1 ton and 1.5 ton was throwing, to the building, all infrastructure and all over the places. But the war didn't stop. And now we have like from more than 500 days. And the mass of after liberation of the territories near Kiev, Chernihiv, Izium. There we found so many civilians being killed. Like in Bucha, everybody knows. All these places now became. And sometimes it's they learned the lesson from Bucha, and now in Izium they dig graves in the forests. But we found it. Going through the position of former position of Russian soldiers, some locals decided to show us. For 2 days, we were trying to find it. And now these crosses were camouflaged, through the trees with the small numbers on them. At that time, there was around like 400 something, 440 crosses. I think 90% was without names. Exhumation, the part of the procedure. And the smell. You will not forget this smell if you heard that before. If you will come there, you will feel that smell again, because a part of the clothes and the remains of the body parts are still there. And now sometimes like relatives should undig and exhumate their relatives themselves. Like this guy. He survived with the shooting of Russians, but his wife and kids did not. We saw that MH17, other soldiers being killed, and all the dead bodies. But this time it's not compare what we have seen before. Bucha, Izium, Kherson, all of these places now have a like dark side, like dark place, in the history. And as well, like tortures. Think systematic, widespread, and arbitrary were everywhere. Like in Chernihiv, in Bucha, in Kiev region, Kharkiv, Kherson, and now it's still in Zaporizhia and the part of Kherson as well, which is occupied. We've been working as a part of doing our own investigation and visited so many places of tortures. We found the victims with the signs and the tools. They were so creative not to leave the signs on the bodies. Using the gas masks, electricity, water, and many other tools. But it's difficult to hide. In some places, even they put all the residents of the village, like Yagina. Around like 10 people died because of the conditions, how they were there. On the right side of this picture, you can see the names of the people who did not survive for the months. 300 people in one shelter. Valentina is one of the survivors. Alexander decided not to give a car to the Russian soldiers, and that's why they beat him. And now he don't remember anything from that specific time, from after he was taken by Russians, hardly beaten, and then they throw in him to the hospital. Thought that he will not survive. In other places, sometimes you think that why they were doing this so, like on every day, taking random people, sometimes specific people. But then you understood that because the occupation, you need to control the minds and to spread fear and panic, and they might to listen you, and they might to be under your control. In some places, even they said that you should sing an anthem of Russia and say glory to Shoigu and glory to Putin. If you're not answering this, they were hardly beaten. Sometimes I thought that was like a movie. And then I met a guy in the church who was hiding in the Gold Pishansky monastery. The priest saved his life and host him, but the Russian found him and took him. He was 3 times under the tortures. They used all the methods I mentioned before on him. But lucky that the priest, like have negotiations with the Russians, and they always let him go. But still, like how the mental health is destroyed after. But now Andriy is at the front line. This is the pictures of the people who've been under the tortures in the Zaporizhia region. And the Yarin is here. This is my relatives. Ongoing rocket attacks. You sometimes you cannot sleep because Shahed drones, rockets are flying just above your house. And they destroy infrastructure. And the people were without electricity for half of the winter, and mostly a winter time. And it was so tough winter. But we survived. I hope it will be easier this time. And of course, many rockets were hit the residential neighborhoods. And all the time you think it's again and again. And then the never-ending story, repetitive. Sometimes it's like, to say it correctly, you don't want to see it, but you go into different places and it looks the same everywhere. Destruction, death is. The location is different, but the end is the same. Funerals, and etc. So like it's ongoing, repetitive in different locations, like Konstantinivka, Kharkiv, Sumy, everywhere. And you still need to photograph this. I wish I not to do that, but I need, because you understand that these images soon will be a part of the investigation, and maybe they will bring justice. I don't know, but we need to continue to do that, because even if it will not guarantee that they will find the guy who pushed on the button, or send the mortar, or etc., but it will explain what is happening. And this is maybe our role of journalists, to keep attention, to give the information publicly, and to do it repetitively every day. I think many cities which were destroyed, and the people who decided to stay there need to have a mental rehabilitation. Some of them are really crazy. Later, I saw that Babushka was evacuated to a safe place, but she was totally lost. We asked her to evacuate, and she said no. Like for her, like she's in a safe place. After liberation of the part of the Kherson region, Russians moved to the left side of the Dnipro, and we knew that Kakhovka Dam is mined, and if they exploded, it will be a disaster. 1 month before the explosion, we visited some islands, and we saw how the reservoir was flooded, and the water level pulled up, or
was going up.
Going up for 1.5 meters. So the reservoir was full, and that on the 6th of June, we heard that at 4 in the morning there was a huge explosion, and the dam and the water started coming. Many houses and many residential neighborhoods were under the water, with the people, dogs, animals, all of them. Now you can see the scale. I never thought that it will be again. During the Second World War, when Russia was moving back, they destroyed Zaporizhia Dam. And now we have Kakhovka Dam. The history is coming back. But because of the level of the altitude of the land on the Russian side is much lower, so it's flooded mostly non-government side rather than government side. And compared to Ukrainian government controlled area, on the Russian side there was no evacuation at all. We saw how Ukrainians started to do operation they can evacuate, and from they saved around 2,000 people from Kherson and other villages. But then some volunteers, together with Ukrainian soldiers, decided to evacuate people from the gray zone and from non-government side. and they using the rubber boats, metal boats, and using the drones to monitor the situation and to find the people. They evacuated around like 150 of them, and include from the Russian control side. Using the drones not only to kill and to monitor, but as well like throw the water. This pilot Santa for 2 hours were trying to throw this bottle to that family, and later the boat came and evacuated them. Then the boat arriving. This is 2 kids and the mother. And as well, like it's never-ending shooting because it's the firing distance is around like 6 kilometers, which is enough for the mortar, which is give you understanding that we are here, and the Russians remind you that this is very close, and this is the front line. And while they trying to evacuate people who are stuck on their roofs, a Russian shot evacuee boat, and by that boat they killed 3 people and injured 6 of them. And I'm finalizing the names of the journalists who are risking their lives for this from the beginning of 24th of February. Unfortunately, we know that this number can be higher. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing the work and the experiences. I will open it up to questions shortly. I just want to point out a few things. You might have noticed the title of the presentation was war crime. And I think it's a term that many of us know, but it's also a term that has legal application. And I was noting a few things while Evgeniy was talking. There was the series of images of investigators. You need to have investigators and evidence in order to prove a war crime. And Evgeniy also made a reference to, when talking about the maternity ward, that there was no military presence there. And what I want to explain is war crimes fall under the heading of international humanitarian law or international criminal law. Without getting into legal specifics, some of the violations of international humanitarian law that rise to the level of a war crime are intentionally directing attacks against civilians, which we've seen, and intentionally directing attacks against civilian objects or infrastructure that have no military objective, which is the point of mentioning there was no military presence here, right? That it's a war crime. And so I just wanted to put that out there. I'll start off with the first question. As Jacob explained in the intro, I specialize in this kind of photography, and I work with photographers in war zones globally. And you shared with us, Evgeniy, a few kind of comments about the smells don't leave you, or I remember the mother screaming. And you also talked about the mental health of Ukraine, essentially, saying that this is a space that's going to have mental health issues now and ongoing. And one of the things that I happen to specialize in, and which I often hear also as a question in public speaking, is how do you process this? How do you deal with this? So I'm going to give that to you as a question. How do you deal with this?
I think because we are journalists, we have a mission. We have a mission to speak and we have a mission to to collect and to bring them with the voices and stories and to bring attention to the problem. And I think this is mentally help us that we are doing something good all the time, thinking that that story can do something. For example, like the story from Mariupol, we didn't knew after how big it was while we were there, because we saw that it was Kiev, and the Russians tried to surround it as well, and how important I think the Kiev was rather than Mariupol. But later, we got an email from the mayor office of Mariupol, and that they wrote with the thanks that because of the imagery and the stories we published from Mariupol, they were like able to negotiate for it in European Union, in UN, to open a green corridor for civilians to the Ukrainian side.
If anyone has questions, I'm happy to take them. I'll start with the first one that's appearing in the chat, and I'm going to read it for the benefit of everyone. Given that images are easily manipulated these days, how do we discern between what's real and what's not? And of course, you gave us the example of one of your real images being flipped in its context, and these were just actors. So how is the public supposed to know what to trust?
I think the best way is to trust the sources, yes, which is give you where you see these images, because nowadays you cannot trust the social media for 100%. So I think the best way is to read the source where you trust, because its influencing of the imagery is so high in the social media as well, and nobody doing the fact check there. They can take the image, right, completely different what is happening or not happening under this picture, and pretend it to be a truth. So that actually happened as well with our photographs, and how they are manipulated and interpreted as well. So it should be, like trustability of the source. So
of the news organization.
Yes.
Are there questions in the room? And you can state them to me and I can sort of repeat them louder for the benefit of the webinar. Yes.
Thank you very much for the event. I'm Ukrainian, I'm from Ukraine and I live in Ukraine. But now I'm here for visiting as a visiting scholar. Evgeniy, thank you so much, not only for this presentation, but for your work, for your struggling as a warrior journalist like you are really struggling for our country and for democracy. And I'm so impressed with this presentation because I saw a large scale of photos on our TV channels and internet, and your photos too. But when I now listened to your stories, how you survived and how you fixed all these damages and all people's stories in Mariupol, it's not only impressed, it's so touchful. Your struggle is real. And you told us a lot. It's very important. You're telling from your work. It's not only work. It's your life. It's your life. And to all people, not only Ukrainian people, because we're getting this information, but around the world. And now here in New York, really important. And my question, because I have documentary studies and archival studies, as I'm a historian, and you're trying to preserve these moments for this time, for maybe legal investigations of these war crimes. but also you documenting this war for memory of our lives, of Ukraine, of our struggling. How do you think? My question is, do you think about preservation of these images, not only for current movement, yes, but for documenting the history, for memory studies, for the researchers and other generations, because it's very important to hear these voices and to see from these images this our history. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to repeat the question. I'm going to boil it down, but thank you for the comment. When you are working, are you thinking about documenting not only in a current event sense, but with a much longer historical trajectory in mind?
I think for sure, like if you are thinking like just of course you thinking about the current, what's happening, but as well the scale of this massive of using the weapon against civilian population. So we're trying to focus to do the focus on our stories as well, like as on the rocket attacks, civilian like destruction of civilian infrastructure, like Khovka Dam, for example, one of the biggest, but as well like how civilians, kids are struggling, and to show, to put them in the archive later in the museum. So I think this is one of the things we are focus nowadays as well, like to cover as much as we can, because unfortunately I'm alone. Like for example, I'm one photographer, yes, but it's many of us all around the country, yeah, which are documenting, and later we will collect different like a puzzle of the big picture, what's happened, and we can more to have like to reflect and to react and write, to think what's happened in that period of time and which images will be important. But now we are concentrated on photographing and documenting most of the time. Yeah.
And you can even see it play out a bit with the distance of time to put together the presentation, that there were the subheadings of, I'm going to take you in this direction, I'm going to take you in that direction, and then that on a larger scale over a longer time.
That of course in a time will be much shorter, of course, much shorter set of images, which will be more relevant, like to tell the story. But now, while the war is still going on, it's always updating.
Lizzie?
You mentioned, I think, the dangers of misinformation on social media, and then also with your last answer, the number of people who are doing this work. It's not just you, but it's a whole coalition of journalists. And in thinking about that and how pieces come together, how do you see the role of civilians who all nowadays have cameras in their pockets, interacting with your role as a professional journalist?
So I'm going to restate. Boiling it down again, the question is, what is the role of civilians who are creating documentation, either versus or alongside your role in a professional capacity?
I think it's good because sometimes you don't have access, or you not be in time, or it's far away. It's the long time to get to the spot where something is happening. So, of course, to have the documentation of this from civilian homes, of course, they give you now a possibility, like to publicate and to tell the story. The journalist cannot be at that specific time there, So this is as well could be a document, and we, for example, very often use, we come later and we try to find what's happened at a specific time. It was shooting, shelling, aftermath, etc., etc. And I think it plays a key role for example, for investigation for other parts. And I give you an example. We left Mariupol on left Mariupol on the March 15th, but on the March 16th, the Russians bombed the drama theater, and there was no journalist. And, it was so hard to investigate. Many people who left the city, who were there, and survivors, they didn't think about photography, but some of them, take a couple of images. And while they tried to escape, they were so scary to keep them in the phone, so they delete them. So even like a small fractions of these pieces can be relevant soon, So
And Evgeniy mentioned Bucha a few times. I know the New York Times did a massive analysis of this city, which had been under Russian control. And a large portion of the analysis, because journalists were not inside the city, was coming from civilian devices. Ari?
Yeah, thank you so much. We were wondering if you can just talk about, because you had a few different video clips in the presentation, the power of photography versus video, capturing one fraction of a second frozen moment in time versus those clicks. And I'm sure there are journalists in the field who maybe specialize and kind of primarily do video. Very much seems like you focus on photo work. And if you could just talk about the differences between those two, kind of what that means to you as a journalist in the field.
So I'm going to restate. A question asking you to talk through your, I guess, prioritizing or emphasis towards still image and the relationship between still and moving image.
I love both, because I think it's some stories cannot be told without the video, and some of the stories can be told without photographs, because the power of the image is sometimes really high. And I love with photo because it's easy to send, and it's have like instant effect now. Like not because, while the video can have more aftermath effect, and later will be used in this in the movies and small documentaries, etc. So because of the movement, you can show the evidences as well. How the tanks roll and the street. And for example, you have one shot in a picture in a photograph, while on the video you have like sequence, which can tell you are more like people voices. I think the power of the image in video for me is the same, but it's different methods of storytelling. So.
Yep.
Yeah, I wonder, as a photojournalist, if this is like your first journalism project, and if so or if not, then how is the fact of being Ukraine some ways change or shape your perspective in viewing the war, also in photojournalism?
I think yes, of course, we are. It's not the first project that you saw, and I'm working for 10 years in photojournalism, so doing many projects, working on many assignments, and doing a different type of. They're creating ideas and then to build them. So this is one of the work which been recognized in Mariupol as our colleagues and got a lot of awards. And still the power of that story is pretty high because it's actually a unique story. And we're like the last journalists were in Mariupol, and we were able to document this and able to escape and not be caught by Russians. That's why this story make us, for example, famous in the sphere of photography and in journalism. And, I would love that it will not be a war at all in Ukraine. I will live a normal life, but it happened. And while you are just a photographer and the war started in your country, if you cannot stand behind and go somewhere else to hide. You should go and do something useful. And I think myself what I should do to be useful for Ukraine. And I think that I should to do the best what I know. If I know how to do a good picture, important picture, and strong picture, I should do it. Maybe because, and that's why I decided to be there, and the power of journalists to tell the world what is going on through the photograph, text, and video, all the formats. Because nowadays you should do all of them. And it's like we are totally multimedia nowadays. And, need to photograph, to shoot video, edit, write text, and like do stories in Instagram and etc. All of this, like it's nowadays you not need, you must. And so that's why, and I think it's influence on us it influenced on me from 2014. And so that's one case, and it's changed me in 2022.
Jason?
This goes back to the disinformation and sort of two-part question. I'm curious how you personally react when Russian propaganda tries to discredit what you've done. How you personally react to something that you know is genuine and is being sort of taken apart and validated. And if you've had a history of that sort of thing happening to you in the past, and I'm wondering if you think it's your role to step in and try to combat that, or is it your job to simply be the documentarian and sort of let the propaganda kind of fade out and do its own thing?
Yeah, so we are not fine.
Let me just restate it. So the question is, talk to us a little bit more about how you were personally attacked and discredited as a Ukrainian propagandist, and do you feel you have a responsibility to address those false claims?
We are not fighting against propaganda. Our role is to bring facts, yes, and to fight against propaganda is not our part, yes. So like, we trying to all the time, like, of course, not react, but we did some reactions after the publication of some interviews and blaming us, and we show the rough cut of the video of what's happening at the place, but as well, like, it was predictable. It was happened not only first to us, it's happened to our Ukrainian colleague who was covering Russian-Georgian war in 2008. It's happened in 2014 in Syria and other places. So we were not the first case, and we were preparing for this. So it's personally, it was like, I think it was a joke, but then I realized that this is serious, and they continue. But I think they lose the fight and not do it again.
Paloma?
Sorry. Obviously, the conflict and the war in Ukraine is very personal to you, and you're directly impacted by it. But not all photojournalists who are documenting these things are personally or directly kind of involved with them. So, do you think that changes the way you approach taking photos and the photos that you take? And do you think there's, what are the benefits and deficits of having both a personally involved photographer and maybe an international photographer who's just involved as a journalist?
So the question is boiled down. The benefits and deficits of being someone who this is your country and you have a personal connection to this versus an outside international journalist who comes in to document?
It's firstly, you have a bad and good in that to be Ukrainian, because this is like personal war, like it's in your country. Good that you know that there is a story, you know the language, it's easy to react, it's faster to react on the events. But it's harder personally when you see injured people, dead people. It's very hard to communicate because all the time, all the pictures become like personal, and all the people you are photographing, you have names, and they know you later, and how the images is spread out, and this is hard. This is hard. While the images become so famous, like everybody use it. So
I have time, I think, for one more question. The white sweater.
Thanks so much for this talk. My question is about compassion fatigue. I wonder if you're concerned with the tendency that audiences eventually lose their interest in like what's happening in the grid, or especially if something else coming up. And so, how you see, or what are the ways to cope with this compassion fatigue for you as a photographer, as a professional, to keep attention on the grid?
So the question is about compassion fatigue, and makes me think of how you said we need to keep covering this repeatedly, right, day after day. But how do you keep, or do you even worry about keeping an audience engaged?
Well, all the time we are trying to think what will be next, because you need to be one step ahead all the time to be a photographer as well. One step ahead, because picture should be in front of you, just not behind. So that's why you're thinking on a prior what can be next and where you should be all the time. So, and that's why we are like trying to nowadays to find super narrow stories which have a really specific focus of interest, like, because it's very hard to keep attention while so many news come in abroad, especially nowadays, Israel, Gaza. So, of course, the focus and the media focus turn to that side. I hope it will come soon, and the topic will come back to Ukraine, so they can the attention to Ukraine, and I think that as well. That specific case can be, for example, like nowadays Israel. Well, nobody is thinking about Ukraine. Russia can do something bad there, and using that this focus is that nobody cares what's happening.
I am going to wind us up in a moment, but there's a comment in the chat about a film called 20 Days in Mariupol, and I think maybe you could just say a sentence or two about this.
This is my colleague and partner did a movie. It's called 20 Days in Mariupol, if nobody knows that. So soon on the 21st of November, it will be online on PBS and YouTube. So if you saw that it will be a screening, so yeah, I recommend you to go and watch, because this is not like only like just a movie. I think it's the movie a document, and later it will be more than document. Maybe it will be more included in our education process, actually, what's the siege happened at that specific time. So, well, if quite recommend you to watch.
If you're enrolled in my reporting on violence class, we will be watching it. So it is part of an educational space, and I do recommend it highly. I know we're just past time. But I'm constantly endeavoring in my work to kind of break down a little bit of the wall or big wall that seems to exist between the media that reaches us and how it gets made. And I think we take in the news, and I think it's also easy to scroll through images, but an actual understanding of what it takes to get the news to us in pictures is very important to me, and obviously very important to Evgeniy. So thank you again for coming, and thank you again to the Jordan Center and the Critical Disaster Studies Initiative, but most especially thank you to Evgeniy for being here.
Thank you.